Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of Doctors Unbound for 2018. I hope you had a special New Year's Eve celebration. I spent some time on call New Year's weekend, which helped me forget that I've notched yet another birthday. I am now 21 years old, as my daughter Caitlin would tell you. This is the time of year when people make New Year's resolutions. I would love to hear about your New Year's resolution, so hit me up on my website or on social media and let me know what things you are resolving to improve in this new year. One of my resolutions is to figure out how to deliver more value to you and to me from this podcast. I think we're off to a really good start, but I'm always looking to figure out ways to improve and deliver more value. One way to do this, I think, is to create a specific Facebook group where we can encourage each other. So look out in the coming weeks for a Doctors Unbound Facebook group. You'll get a behind-the-scenes look at things that I'm doing to better myself. For example, health is a big one for me. Used to be a bit of an athlete growing up, enjoyed playing lots of sports, and I just kind of have fallen off of that bandwagon, and I definitely need to get back on. So you'll definitely see some posts in there, maybe some post-workout pictures, things that can motivate and encourage you in your own health journey. And you'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at things that I'm doing to make this podcast. So if you're interested in taking more action on the advice that you're hearing from this podcast, join me in the Doctors Unbound Facebook group. Okay, what better way to start 2018 than with Future Proof MD? Are you future proof? Here are some key things to take away from this episode. What had surprised this doc most about being a physician blogger? His experience tracking his net worth publicly online, especially starting from financial ground zero as a resident. You'll hear his top financial tips for young physicians, his biggest struggles that he sees for young doctors and doctors in training related to their money and their finances. What else do we talk about? His take on artificial intelligence and the supposed replacement of radiologists. That is his chosen specialty, so we definitely get into that a little bit. And one thing that he says you should do today for your money health. So be sure to listen all the way through to this episode to get all of these great financial tips and hear the story of how he built Future Proof MD into a successful blog. Without further ado, here is this episode with Dr. Bo Liu of Future Proof MD. Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Unbound podcast. Today I am super excited once again because I've got Dr. Bo Liu, who is the author and creator of Future Proof MD. Dr. Bo Liu, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, for sure. I am excited to have you on the show. We're going to get into a lot of interesting conversation about the blog, the financial blog that you've created for physicians. But first, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you, the man behind the blog. So morning routines is a question that comes up quite a bit. I know with physicians and having set schedules, sometimes our morning routines are dictated to us. But can you tell us if you have a morning routine and if there's anything you wish you would change about it if you do have one?
You're going to be a little disappointed, David. My morning routine is practically non-existent. I'm not a morning person. I basically roll out of bed, wash up, and get to work, and on time if possible. So if I could wish for anything to change, I really would wish I could be more of a morning person and maybe get up an hour early, and I could get a lot done then.
Yeah, I definitely understand that, especially when we do our training. Sometimes we get up very early to begin with. So a lot of times it's just maximizing that sleep as much as we can because we're going to have a busy day ahead of us.
Yep.
All right, cool. How about a favorite food or drink? Anything that strikes your fancy?
Well, I'm really a sucker for a good Moscow Mule.
Okay.
Yeah. And as far as food, I like all foods. I don't have a favorite food. I do have a favorite fruit, and that's watermelon.
Okay, watermelon. Yes, very cool. All right. How about when you're not working? I know with doctors and sometimes our free time is kind of limited, but is there a hobby that you enjoy doing when you're not working?
Of course, you know about the blog, so I spend quite a bit of time on Future Proof MD. But other than that, I am into this racket sport called badminton. A lot of people don't even know what it is. I have to share plenty of Wikipedia links. But it's a sport that involves hitting a little feathery birdie called a shuttlecock back and forth.
That's interesting you say that. I grew up in Southern California, and the high school nearest to me, Buena Park High School, I think they were like champions in badminton for years running. So never really played it myself, but I remember they were hanging those banners in that local high school.
Yeah, I encourage you to watch some of the Olympics rallies if you can. They can be quite intense.
Oh yeah, for sure. That ball goes, or well, I guess not really a ball, but that is it a shuttlecock,
Yep.
something like that. Yeah,
Yep.
that thing goes back and forth pretty quick.
Yeah. I think it may be the fastest sport in the world. I'm not sure. It might be one or two
Yeah,
fastest sport in the world.
for sure. Okay, so let's get a little bit into Future Proof MD. Can you take us back to the beginning when the idea for this blog was just a small idea in your head? Can you tell us, when that was, the circumstances around building that blog?
Oh yeah, of course. I had always been interested in personal finance. I have been following a series of bloggers. The one that you're most familiar with is probably Dr. Jim Daly, the white coat investor.
Yep, we just had him on.
That's right. And then he's been running his blog since 2011, I believe. And so I've been reading and lurking on his blog for a while, and I've had it in my mind at some point, like, hey, I do have some ideas about this, and I want to talk about it as well. The thing that really kind of kicked it into high gear was when I was an intern. This is in 2013. I went to a recruitment dinner, if you will. It was one of those dinners that put on by a financial advising group who are quote unquote physician specialists. And they, invite you out to a nice dinner and they give you a presentation. And during the presentation, I noticed there was some information about public service loan forgiveness that were incorrect. And in my head, I was thinking, hey, if these people who are quote unquote physician specialists are getting the facts wrong, what about all the other financial advisors out there who are not focused on physicians? So that's kind of when I first started. So my very first post actually was about public service loan forgiveness. And that's kind of when things started to kick into high gear. As you can imagine, the life of an intern or a resident physician is not really conducive to producing a lot of content on a regular basis. So it really just, it wasn't until 2016 when I started writing regularly and kind of putting out content at a weekly interval.
Okay. Did you see any change as far as your audience and readership when you went from kind of the more sporadic posting to the more regular schedule?
I definitely think there's a lot more frequent visitors. As I think that's probably a rule when it comes to online content outlets. If you have a consistent schedule, I think your readers or your viewers tends to come back more often.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that for myself too with podcasting. I consume a lot of podcasts, and I know that when I either they tell me their posting schedule or I notice a pattern. Hey, we usually see episodes on this day or whatever. Then I I'm kind of trained to look for it, and when it's not there, you kind of get a little bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then if if it doesn't happen, a couple times in a row, then you stop checking as frequently. So I think having that consistent schedule is definitely huge.
Can't agree more.
All right. So is there anything that surprised you the most about this endeavor, about building this blog?
I think what really surprised me was how big of a community there is in personal finance blogging. When we first started, I think it was just Dr. Dali's website, and there was another blogger went by Dr. Wise at the time, and unfortunately she since left us. And then it was, I think there may be a couple more that I'm not familiar with at the time, but when I started in 2015, there was very few of us physician finance bloggers, and this year I went to FinCon 2017, which is a big conference for financial media. And I met so many people, and I met you there as well.
Yeah, it was great to actually see you in person.
Yeah, it's just amazing the community we have, and I think that's probably the biggest surprise is how many people share our common goal of helping people get free of the day-to-day.
Yeah, I agree. I went to Podcast Movement this year, and then FinCon was in Dallas, which is my hometown. So it was really awesome to be able to meet all these physicians in this space that are doing some pretty cool things, like yourself. And I've noticed it too over the last 2 years or so. The number of physicians that are getting into this kind of online space is increasing, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I think it's great for the physician community. All right. I'm going to move on here to another question. One thing that I noticed that's somewhat unique about your blog is that you track your net worth on there. And I think you track it quarterly. And I was wondering how this decision to track your net worth publicly, especially because as a resident, you're starting with a low, or even I think I noticed a negative amount on there. How does that impact you, psychologically, behaviorally, tracking it when you're starting kind of from ground zero?
Yeah, it's definitely negative. It's never been positive for as long as I can remember, David. So I actually, because I...
But you're a rich doctor.
Yeah, exactly, What a shocker, right? So when I started the blog, that was one of the ideas I had. So I actually published my first net worth tracker very, very early on. What happened was some people, family and friends who I really respect, and then approached me and told me, hey, that's dangerous. I didn't really understand why that was going to be dangerous because, here I am, 6-figure in the red. Why would anybody, do anything to this guy? But I just respect these people's opinion and stopped. But about a year later, and I'm actually tracking my net worth this entire time on my own, just have not been publicizing it. About a year later, I decided, hey, it can't really hurt, and this gives people a view into my situation, into how I manage my money, and kind of help them keep me accountable, so that they know I'm not only just, talking the talk, I'm also walking the walk. So that's kind of why I started doing it on a regular basis. As far as how it impacted me in, mentally and behaviorally, I think the biggest thing is just because I am very open with this stuff. I think it's forced me to be more astute, to pay more attention to my finances than I would have if I wasn't keeping track of this and if I wasn't publicizing it. So I think that's a good thing. I might be a little OCD, as you can imagine. A lot of physicians might be, but I think that's probably the biggest positive change as far as tracking my net worth openly.
Okay. I would imagine, like you were kind of saying, if you're tracking it and posting it publicly, that it might even affect your your day-to-day decision making, because now in the back of your mind there might be that small little idea of like, hey, how is this going to impact when I have to show this, kind of like if your goal was to lose weight and you were tracking somewhere publicly where thousands of people are seeing it, what your weight is every day or every month, it might affect what you're consuming on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever I try to make a big purchase or something that's a little bit, more substantial than your average grocery purchase, I think a little bit about whether or not I want to put it on a credit card, because that's going to show up in the debt column.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I think that's a great thing that you're doing to help physicians and probably to help you too on some level. What are some of your top few tips for young physicians, who are starting out their career, to kind of start it off on the right path?
Yeah, so I think the biggest decision you have to make is to pay attention to your finances. And it's easy not to, because we're so busy, and we're in our lives, our entire professional careers, we've been taught to do medicine, take care of patients, study the science. And honestly, there's not a lot of free time left in the day for you to really focus on, things. And if you do have the time, some people may have other hobbies, that rather than focus on your finances. So that's probably the biggest tip. A couple other things, I the concept of pay yourself first, and I've talked about that before. The idea is basically make a commitment to your future and have all the, whether it's a percentage or a dollar amount from your paycheck, go automatically into investing into retirement accounts and things like that, so that you don't have to think about spending that money because it's not even available for you. So that's another thing. The other thing, the third thing I would say is to try not to confuse, I guess, the insurance aspect of your finance life with the best aspect of your finance life, because there are people who are out there who will try to convince you it's really nice to have the two combined.
I'm sorry, can you just clear up that last part a little bit more?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, like a lot of the medical professionals are kind of high value clients, if you will, for financial professionals. And one of the products that people like to, I don't know about push, but like to introduce to you, is something called whole life or universal life insurance. What that is basically a life insurance product that's combined with the investing plan. And the pitch has always been, hey, you can pay your premium and have that money earn money for you on top. To me personally, if you are a physician, you should be able to self-insure yourself by the time you really need life insurance, right?
Yeah.
And before then, it's much better to just have a term insurance to cover, when during your younger years and middle-age years. And those are much cheaper, and they don't come with massive fees.
So let's move a little bit to maybe some struggles. What are some struggles with managing money that that you've seen for yourself, or maybe that you've seen amongst your physician colleagues?
Yeah, so the biggest problem for us, because I like to, my peers and my blog audience is mostly for medical trainees, is a low level of income. And that kind of is the biggest financial stressor for people like me and pretty much everybody I talk to who's a resident or a fellow or a medical student coming up. Unfortunately, that's not something, the system is built in such a way that would be very difficult to change. The best way I've found to address that issue is by finding additional sources of income outside your medical training. Some people can moonlight in their residency programs, and I advocate for that if their opportunity is available. My blog, obviously that's not going to be a typical source of side income for everybody, but there's other ways you can try to make some income. Of course, the trade-off is time. As we discussed earlier, we're already kind of pressed on time as medical trainees.
Yeah, for sure. And I think With the blog, obviously, it's a little bit tough because there's a lot of work that goes in up front without even the guarantee of a payout. Now, it can become passive and lucrative somewhere down the road, but you don't know that's going to happen. But I agree with you. Trying to find additional sources of income is huge.
That's right.
All right, we're going to move on and switch gears a little bit here. I want to take advantage of the fact that you're a radiologist here. There's been a lot of talk that I've seen online about how artificial intelligence is going to replace radiologists soon. I'd like to get your take on this important topic.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic. We've been talking about it at every single conference I went to. I think the short answer is yes, that's coming. But the long, nuanced answer is I think radiology and radiologists will still exist, but the things that we will be doing, say 30 years from now, will be very different from what we're doing today. In a sense, that's kind of, medical science in a nutshell, right? Like the things that you're doing, in surgery, anesthesia, in radiation oncology 30 years ago are also going to be very different than what you're doing today. So it's just a constant change.
Yeah, I agree. And, for this particular conversation, it's radiology and AI. But I think this can be expanded to, like you said, medicine in general. Technology, is always going to advance. And I think the wrong thing to do is to be scared of it, to try and fight it. I think the better thing for physicians to do is to become super educated on it, and basically harness it, right? Be able to figure out ways to use it, to harness it, to improve medicine and our specialties.
Exactly. That's completely, I totally agree with what you just said.
Cool. We are going to move on to the latter part of our interview here, and this is kind of based a little bit on, advice for the listener out there. So, what is one thing or action that you'd like for listeners to do after this, listening to this podcast today?
Yes, and they should have done this, last year, is start tracking your money. There's a lot of really great financial aggregators out there. I personally use a couple. Mint.com is one, Personal Capital is another, and they do a great job of getting all of your money related things in one place, so you can have kind of glance at it. You can see your net worth. You can see how much money you're spending. You can see how much money is coming in. So if you don't already track the money, this would be a good time to start.
Cool. Do you have a preference between those two? I've used both of them. I started off with Mint before I found out about Personal Capital, and I have to say that I prefer Personal Capital. Now, I don't use it kind of religiously, if you will, but I kind of like to see it as a, kind of as a 30,000 foot view snapshot of, net worth and kind of what my different balances are.
Yeah. Here's something that's really funny. For a long time, Personal Capital would not track one of my accounts correctly. So I couldn't actually use it. Like, it would sync with Vanguard, but it would just pull in the completely random numbers. At some point, they went and fixed their syncing issue. So now I actually use it a lot more. I agree with you. I think it's actually a little bit better. At least for my student loans, it gets the most up-to-date number out instead of Mint just gets the principal balance. So that was a big difference. So I've been using it more and more, but that change is kind of quite recent. For maybe 3 months ago is when they fixed that syncing error. So I still kind of default to Mint most of the days.
Gotcha. And I think one thing with Personal Capital is once you sign up, that you'll get a phone call from them, almost like trying to be your financial advisor, maybe make some recommendations. To date, I've just kind of avoided those phone calls or just told them I'm busy or not interested. It hasn't been like super spammy or anything like that, but just for people out there, to be aware that you're probably going to get a phone call, not super high pressure, but just them trying to get a phone call meeting with you.
Yes, and the way they identify who to call is if you have $100,000 or more that's being tracked by them.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, that's interesting. So they definitely know who to go after, I guess.
Yeah, they're focusing on the people that are high value targets.
Gotcha. How about one thing that you wish you did differently in your career thus far?
Um, so my biggest mistake, and this relates to investing, is when I graduated medical school, I came out with a typical amount of debt. So a part of my brain said I should pay off that debt as quickly as possible. So I cashed out my investments at the time, and I paid down about a quarter of my medical education debt. And that's probably the biggest mistake, because if I would have kept all of my investment at the time and just didn't touch them and wait until today, I would have been able to pay off all of my debts, the education debt, everything else, with just the Netflix shares I had.
Wow.
So, yeah,
What time period was that where you cashed out? What
that
year?
was 2013.
2013. Okay, I was just wondering how, if if your mindset was affected by the crash in 2008 and kind of kind of it seemed like that was such a bad time, and I still remember it, and it seems like for a lot of people it was kind of a scary time, making people maybe do something like that.
Yeah, so I actually did not get. I was not smart enough to invest during that whole recession period, but I was able to get into the market in 2011, right when everything was starting to come back up.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually, to me, that was a nice little gain, and I was able to use a lot of the profit to pay off debt. So I thought it was a really smart idea. But then looking back today, it would have been much better to just let that money sit and appreciate over time.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess if the market had gone down, you'd been feeling like a genius. But
Exactly.
so hindsight, we can look back and make these determinations. But that's very interesting. How about the one resource that you would recommend to our listeners out there that is not your own?
Yes, so I would recommend I guess now is the White Coast Investor Network. So for a long time, I was recommending Dr. Liu's site, White Coast Investor, but this year it's expanded to include Physician on Fire and Passive Income MD. And all three of these bloggers I met in person, and they are excellent people, and they have fantastic advice. And I encourage anybody who listens to the podcast or read my blog to check out their websites as well.
Yep, I'd agree. I met all three of them. All of them are stand-up people, and all of them have really good information on their sites. And it's all has its own unique take. And so I think that adds value to get that perspective from the different folks there. All right, so we're going to end on the sort of whimsical question. And when you're going through, medical training, I know how rigorous that could be. So if there was one place you'd fly to tomorrow and you had no commitment and infinite resources, where would that be for you?
I would go to Harbin, China, where my grandparents live. Their health is not so good, and I would love to kind of see them and take care of them before, they become even more ill. And I was very close to my grandfather. He's actually the reason I chose to go into medicine as a career. So that would be, if I had no limits on what I could do and I can fly anywhere tomorrow, that's what I would do.
That's pretty special. Have you had a chance to go to China anytime recently?
Yeah, so I go home about every 2 years. Last time I went was in 2016, and I will skip 2018 because of fellowship training. Just won't have the time, but I will try to go back in 2019.
That's cool. Well, I hope you you make it there and have a special time with your family, because money's important, but it's not nearly as important as family, for sure.
Exactly, and I think that's probably the best time to end on, right? That's a positive note there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we talk about money and the importance of it, but it's important as a tool and what it can do for us. And one of the things that it can do for us is help us take care of our families, spend more time with our family and friends. So, that's a big reason why, I'm sure why you do what you do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Money is just a tool, and you use it to get what you want out of life. And I think that's something that people need to keep sight of.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think that's a great place to end this talk. Where can people reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
They can find me at futureproofmd.com. It's a blog for medical students, residents, and fellows.
Very cool. We'll definitely link to it in our show notes. Dr. Bo Liu, thank you so much for being on Doctors Unbound.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.